What is up, everybody? Welcome to the RotoWire Soccer Show. My name is Jack Burkart. You can find me on Twitter at Jack Burkart. And I am here to do a quick little solo stream for tomorrow's FA Cup final, which is a Manchester derby. We have Manchester City, who are playing against Manchester United at Wembley. And I think there's jokes that like every single Manchester United fan is actually from London. So maybe we can consider this a home game for Manchester United. But yeah, we just wanted to break this down. We have some good contests in the lobby. We have 10,000 of first place in the primary GPP, healthy lower stakes GPPs around the place, and a 100-man big double up. So pretty decent contests to look into. And so I just wanted to kind of break this thing down and see if we could find any strategy possible, because this is a Manchester City slate. We're going to expect that Manchester City are going to possess most of the ball. We're going to expect that Manchester United are going to play on the counter, and Manchester United have conceded a ton of fantasy points this season, and I really don't see any reason for that not to continue. We have Manchester City, who have implied win probability of around 75%. If you use Pinnacle Sportsbook, they have an implied goal total around 2.65. Whereas Manchester United's implied goal total is around 0.9, and they have a 17% chance to win. That's winning in regular time, right? We'll have extra time and penalties if things carry on, and that does carry some amount of DFS relevance. So, I mean, I think these sports books are usually fairly sharp with these things. Manchester City are expected to do well. Maybe there's a narrative. We have Erik ten Hag. This is going to be his last game for Manchester United. He's been talking about how this is the most important game for the last month. Maybe Manchester United have something special up their sleeves, but you can save that sort of watermelon brain stuff for tournaments. First thing I wanted to do is try to, figure out what sort of lineups we might be looking at. So I have good old FOTMob up here. We don't quite have the FA Cup cheat sheets ready on the site, but we do have FA Cup statistics, which will be really, really nice next season on rotowire.com, rotowire.com/soccer trial. If you're not already a member, if you are, thank you very much. Why don't you give us a like? Why don't you comment? All that stuff helps the channel stay nice and healthy. I guess the question for Manchester City is, how aggressive is Pep going to be with his starting 11? He rolled out a more conservative lineup against West Ham that looked very similar to the one I have on my screen, right? So for defense, he's been rolling out Kyle Walker, Ruben Diaz, Manuel Akanji, Josko Gvardiol. Stefan Ortega has to start because I think Ederson broke his eye or something horrific. I hope everything is okay with him. Those can be scary injuries. We'll have Rodri. We're expecting Bernardo Silva, Phil Foden, Kevin De Bruyne to play, and then Erling Haaland. Erling Haaland will, of course, be taking penalties. He's probably going to play most of the game. Phil Foden and Kevin De Bruyne have been splitting corner kicks recently and the direct free kicks as well. I observed in the West Ham game, it just depended on which side of the pitch it was on. So it could be luck that Foden gets a lot more than Kevin De Bruyne, but we should basically just assume a 50-50 split. The question is Jeremy Doku or Jack Grealish going to start? Now, Doku played a few minutes during the West Ham game. He looked very, very good. But in these important games, sometimes we see Pep take a more control lineup. And if he does that, maybe you see someone like Mateo Kovacic start, and this formation looks like a 4-2-3-1. So that's something that we're going to want to be on the lookout for. On the other side of things, Bruno Fernandes is back after a couple games gone. I mean, he's got a couple starts. He always plays 90 minutes whenever he starts. He's the everything man for Manchester United. We're talking penalties, direct free kicks, and corner kicks, particularly if this is something resembling the starting 11. So Bruno is the everything man in terms of set pieces. Going down the line for the defense, we're expecting Wan-Bissaka to start. Casemiro's been deputizing as a center back to somewhat hilarious results. I think Casemiro's a good player. He's just not a natural center back. He's been doing some defensive midfielder things, and that kind of puts the defense in some vulnerable positions. Lisandro Martinez is back. He's a good center back. And then we have Diogo Dalot. We're looking at holding midfielders of Sofian Amrabat or Kobe Mainoo. I mean, I think both are decent players, but I don't particularly think either is DFS relevant. Every time I say that about Kobe Mainoo, he ends up scoring. So that's one thing worth keeping in mind. We have Alejandro Garnacho and Amad Diallo maybe playing on the wings. This lineup has Scott McTominay as some sort of auxiliary forward, which he sometimes does. Maybe Rasmus Højlund starts. He scored a goal in the last week. I personally think that would make a lot of sense, but again, who knows? That's something we're going to have to adjust for overall. And of course, we're expecting Onana in goal. So that's what we're looking at with the lineups. Let's see what we have in terms of the chat here. Ozzy, he's a regular. 5-1 Man City stack. Yeah, that's going to be extremely popular. And then Chris Jack, the People's Champion. Yes, I am the People's Champion. I won't even be humble about it. Let's take a look at some of the prices that we're looking at. So I'm going to switch my tab over. All right, very good. Let's get a little bit of a zoom in for the people. I am a man of the people overall. All right, brilliant. Now, when I was looking through prices just came out an hour ago. It doesn't seem very strategically rich, this showdown. So I'm not surprised to see that the three highest priced players are Phil Foden, Kevin De Bruyne, and Erling Haaland. They're all around, and we'll just look at flex prices, 10,000, and all priced within 400 of each other. I think in cash games, you're going to be captaining one of Phil Foden or Kevin De Bruyne, and then I'm just going to plug in KDB captain over Phil Foden. I don't really have an opinion on who you captain, but you should play both, and I think you should captain one of them. I think that's pretty important. Their floors are going to be really good. There's going to be shots. If there's a lot of shots, there's going to be a lot of shots assisted. Those are very highly correlated stats. I mean, most shots are assisted. I think 90% of them. So with Manchester United being like Sheffield United when it comes to conceding shots, I just project a huge floor and a great role for either of these players. I don't know, maybe some fragility. We'll look into that later, but I kind of just want to go through pricing at the moment. We have Erling Haaland, who's fairly expensive, but then you look at the other options like if Alvarez, we're not expecting Alvarez to start, but Doku is 9,800 if he starts, and he's certainly not going to play 90 minutes. Like he's definitely not going to go into extra time. Maybe I'll eat those words. Maybe you're looking at 75 minutes. That's fairly expensive. I probably would not go there in cash games. You know, you have to compare him to Erling Haaland. I'm not sure I have an opinion there. But again, just to get more of a feel here, we have 8,800 Jack Grealish if he starts, 9K Rodri. He's got like plus 300 goal scoring odds. He has like a 7-point floor over his last 10 matches. That's very expensive. We're not getting like the 5,600 Rodri who breaks slates with late goals and things like that. So you're definitely paying up for most of the premium Manchester City pieces. Like Oscar Bob is over 8K if he somehow started this match. Got Bernardo Silva, probably not like a cash game type of option, but he's always a tournament option at 7,400. That's kind of where I see the next tier of pricing. So most of the most of the players we want to play are quite expensive. Scrolling down, we have Bruno who's around 8,000. Yeah, I mean, there's just not a lot of like most of what am I trying to say? There's not like a lot of like cheap attacking value that's jumping off the page to me as I scroll through. Now, if you go down, one thing I notice is that, you know, we have where is Bruno? Bruno's 8,400. Manchester City really stifle floors, but maybe, you know, Bruno with a really good role, maybe you can play him. That's a question you'll have to figure out. Got Vardiol at 7K. Ryan Belangi bumped his price after he flag planted him and start a couple months ago, and Vardiol started going nuts scoring goals. Garnacho and Diallo are interesting at around 6K. The goalkeepers are cheap. We have Ortega at 6K for a cup final that could go to 120 minutes. That's not so bad, I think. And then it's crazy to see Onana, you know, sub 4K, $3,800 goalkeeper. I think that's going to be a really popular option. And then, excuse me, remaining players are mostly like center backs and fullbacks. You know, if we have someone like where was he? Kovacic start, he's like 5,600. You know, you could play someone like Juan Bissaka for 3,400 if you need. I think our cheapest projected starter is Lisandro Martinez at 3,200. So nothing too crazy that I'm seeing from the price. And I kind of wanted to go through cash games just for a moment because you have to decide which Manchester City players to play. Like I said, I like to start with Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden like I have on the screen. But now I'm going to take us over to the RotoWire page. I'm using the DFS trends tab. So if you're in soccer DFS, you can go to EPL, you can hit DFS trends, and then you have a whole bevy of various fantasy scores that you can look at, especially for all sites. So we're using Premier League right here. What I have is I filtered for floor. Yeah, we should hide players not on original team. I don't think that will affect anyone necessarily. Well, that loads. And then you have a bunch of things to sort through here. I like the game started only tab. That really helps me analyze a floor of a player versus how many points they score with goals and assists and yellow cards. And these new tabs here, last 5 started, last 10 started, last 20 started, they can give you maybe a feel for recent trends or recent form, or maybe detect if a role has changed, like, oh, has someone started taking set pieces more or less or something like that. And then we can always filter by team. And now I promise you, I have a point right here. We see that Phil Foden is really, really close to Kevin De Bruyne in terms of floor. Again, it's really tough for me to have an opinion on which one to start ahead of the other. We'll try to parse that. Something interesting that I observe is that Erling Haaland's floor has not been particularly good. We're looking at 7.6 floor. His anytime goal scoring odds are at minus 160 in this match. You really need him to score a goal. I think he'll be pretty popular in cash, but like, he could easily score like 5 points. I know he missed a couple really close chances against West Ham, but if Erling Haaland doesn't score a goal, you're not going to want him in GPPs. And at minus 160 anytime, uh, I think there's room to fade him in cash and in tournaments. So again, the floor is just not really that great from Haaland lately, and you're looking at spending 10K on him. And if you're playing Foden and De Bruyne and Haaland in tournaments, you're going to have a lot of overlapping ownership. So looking at someone like Haaland is going to be a really interesting decision point in all formats. I think we have a question in the chat here. Ozzy, Foden has been taking more corners. Is KDB still safe? We can take a look right here. So I pulled up KDB's minutes. I mean, he's been playing over 70 minutes. He's been playing 80 or more minutes most of the time. He has one early stub against Brighton Hove Albion, but that was, oh, wait. Oh, yeah. Okay, I needed to scroll a little bit more. Yeah, I think his early subs have been due to like congested fixtures. We see 3 games in 1 week right here. With 1 full week, I'm expecting KDB to still play about 80 minutes, even with injury issues. There just hasn't been much going on there. And then if you take Foden, Foden, again, he usually also plays 80 minutes. Both these guys, if it's the 81st minute and one of them gets subbed off, it could happen, especially if Manchester City are trying to ice the game away. But if it's a competitive game, I would expect them to stay on a bit more. They're going to be, they're going to want to push, and they're going to want to have their best players. Although if you can reload with Julian Alvarez, who knows? That's not such a bad substitute to put on, even for the excellent Phil Foden and Kevin De Bruyne. So as far as who's taking more corners, I think it comes down to luck. Which side do the corners come down on? They're choosing the sides. It's like those things, with Liverpool back in the day, maybe a month ago, where it was just TAA and Robertson. Sometimes TAA got all the corners. Sometimes Robertson did. Sometimes it was a split. Them's the breaks with set pieces, but I think a 50-50 split is about what I have projected. Some other relevant plays I wanted to take a peek at. I was interested in Bruno Fernandes at 8,200. What are we getting from him? And I filtered his 2 games against Manchester City. So on the road game, he did get an assist, and he also posted like a 6.5 point floor. That's on the road at City. I had to laugh at this 4-2-4-0 formation that Opta gave Manchester United. I've never quite seen anything like that. A bit disrespectful in my opinion. But also at home earlier in the season, he had 9 floor points. So Bruno's someone who I think can post a respectable score of 8 points. At 8,200, I don't know. He's an interesting name in cash games. And another cash game target that I was looking at was Andre Onana. United concede a lot of shots. So that's going to add a lot of volatility. But if you look at his 2 games against Manchester City, he conceded 3 goals each time, but he posted a respectable score, 4.5 and 7.1 in the away leg and the home leg, respectively. At 3,800, if Onana puts up 6 points, we're quite happy. And I think Alphonse Areola put up a really good score against Manchester United. I know Ceramic was winning GPPs with a couple City players and Areola and goal. Yeah, you're looking at upside where, even if you concede 3 goals, you still have outs to 10 or more DraftKings points if you play a really cheap goalkeeper. So I think Onana is a really, really strong play in the spot. Just pause for a second. Yeah, so I talked about the difference between Kevin De Bruyne and Phil Foden. There really isn't much. Want to be careful with Haaland, especially in cash games. You really need a goal from him. I don't think he's a lock by any means in either format. I think I'll lean towards playing him in cash games, but yeah, that's kind of what you're looking at. But let's actually try to look at lineups for cash games. So let me throw this tab up here. Like I said, you want to captain one of KDB or Foden. So for now, I'll just put Foden in. Now, if you KDB captain. Now, if you play Holland, you're looking at about 5K average salary, which isn't too terribly restrictive. But if you look down the range, there's not really anyone attractive who's very cheap. I think Onana is a really good play. Then you're looking at about 5K each, a bunch of center backs. I don't want to play Manchester United center backs unless I really, really have to. Um, so, I mean, you could do something like, I don't know, Bernardo Silva, and then you could pay all the way down with a Lisandro Martinez, but I don't necessarily think that's optimal. Something that stands out to me is maybe taking an option, doing some double goalkeeper thing like Stefan Ortega. Manchester United should get a few shots. Manchester City are very much favored to win. If this goes to penalty shootouts, sometimes goalkeepers, they have outs to a couple extra points, maybe a couple extra saves. They do get credit for saves in a penalty shootout. I just think Ortega is a little bit too cheap here. I think we've seen goalkeepers, with this type of win probability priced around 7K in Showdown. And there's really just not that much to play otherwise. I mean, I think Gvardiol is a pretty interesting option at 6,800. He's a player who has outs to score a goal. He has outs to bail you out, which I think makes him really interesting in Showdown cash games. I don't really want to play Diallo or Garnacho in cash. It just doesn't, I don't want to play more Manchester United players than I necessarily have to. I don't really want to play Kovacic, but if we look at his floor, he puts up a respectable floor, 6.5 floor points in his last 10 starts. So it's like, okay, you can play Kovacic. Kind of feels like he doesn't have any outs. And again, every time I say that, he somehow scores a goal in the 80th minute. He's a completely reliable option at 5,600. And otherwise, you're kind of just looking at how you're filling out the rest of these spots. A Ruben Diaz, do you want to play? I don't want to play a Dallo if I don't have to. Ruben Diaz or a Kanji. I think I always like Ruben Diaz because he's a bit bigger than a Kanji. He commits a few less fouls, but he's 600 more. Maybe you could just play two Manchester City center backs, have some goal outs, that type of thing. And then you're not so reliant on the Stefan Ortega clean sheet bonus. But yeah, I think this is one way. I think I'm expecting to roll out with something that looks like these four players in cash games. I mean, another thing that you could do is you could fade Erling Haaland. Maybe this is more of a 3-man move, and then you could play Bruno Fernandes. You have a little bit more cash to work with at this point. Now, you could still play an Ortega if you wanted to, or you could again play a Gvardiol, and then you just have a couple other lineups. So, I mean, in that sort of thing, you're saying, I think Haaland's a bit overrated. I'm willing to fade, probably 50% or more ownership and double ups. I don't know. I don't think it's such a bad way. I don't think it's such a bad way to play it. You don't have to play Onana then. And you could just play two City center backs along with it. And then you're hedged against the clean sheet because you would have two center backs getting clean sheet points just in case the win clean sheet doesn't happen. And that offers you a little bit of protection against Ortega lineups. So I do think that's interesting. And if you wanted to roll up Bruno on a flex, I really don't think that's insane. If you did that in a head-to-head against me, I wouldn't think you're making a big mistake. You could even play Bruno and Onana in the same lineup. But those are really the only two Manchester United players I'm interested in, unless I come up with some other lineup that just requires a Wan-Bissaka or a Lisandro. I just hope that neither of them gets a yellow card, that type of thing. So that's my quick take on cash games. And what does that help us learn about tournaments? I'm expecting this trio to be very popular because they're going to be very popular in cash games, but then you don't really have a lot of salary to differentiate yourself. There's not a lot of lineups that are any good that leave salary on the table. Like, maybe you can find them, but that's not too terribly interested. The field likes playing the cheap goalkeeper a little bit more. So I don't think Onana is going to be like a super sneaky play in GPPs, especially in the $20 GPP. I think there's just a lot of potential overlapping ownership. Now, if you're going to be someone who plays like 20 lineups, whether it be in the $20 entry or the $1 entry, maybe you want to diversify your approach a little bit. So, maybe you can play a few lineups that look like KDB, Foden, and Haaland and try to find some leverage in some other spots. Maybe scramble up who you play at captain. I think that's a completely reasonable play to play it. I'm probably going to play some of my lineups that are a bit more safe, but I'd also like to play some lineups that are slightly more contrarian in their scope. I mean, for example, one thing I always like to do, especially when Manchester City is the opponent and the goalkeeper is this cheap, is play someone like Andre Onana. And then you don't really even have to play any Manchester United pieces. You could play a Bruno Fernandes and maybe he gets a penalty and maybe somehow, United win 1-0. And in that type of lineup, you're like, okay, Foden and KDB, and then you can just afford, you have like 8,000 salary per spot left. So you can afford just about whatever you want. I'm totally happy playing for Manchester City players because if you imagine how like a 1-0 script works for Manchester United, they're going to sneak a goal and then they're going to try to soak up a lot of pressure. So I like Onana captains with Bruno that look something like that. You don't even have to play Bruno. You could play an Onana captain with 5 Manchester City players. I've seen good players do this. I won a Germany, Japan World Cup GPP doing this one time, which felt pretty cool. It's a totally viable approach. So captaining someone really cheap just to afford different combinations of players. You can play these big 3, Foden, Haaland, and De Bruyne. And then you could also afford like Doku if he started, and that would be a completely reasonable lineup. So just ways to sneak in different combinations of players I think is interesting. Again, I don't really think, I'm suggesting goalkeeper captains, which is kind of the stock thing to do, especially on RotoWire. Adam Zadroik and I are big fans of that. I think Ortega is a perfectly fine captain. You have a lot of salary, a lot of things that you can do with him. So I'll probably play a couple goalkeeper captains. Ozzy's saying he likes Gvardiol and Cash. I don't mind Gvardiol necessarily as a captain. He's someone who I don't think is going to be that high owned as a captain. I think he has some goal upside and he could benefit from a clean sheet. So if it's something like a 2-0 win for Manchester City and Gvardiol gets one of those goals, he's been in excellent form. He could be one of the top scorers for Manchester City, which is something that's really, really enticing for me. If we go back to our cheat sheet right here and we're looking at our average floor over the last 10 games, they were looking at Gvardiol as someone just short of 7 floor. He has a very similar floor to Bernardo Silva, similar goal scoring odds, and he gets the clean sheet bonus. I just think he seems like a very interesting contrarian captain choice in the largest field GPPs. So, whether that's the 20 or the 1 or whatever you like to play, those are players that I'm quite interested in. You could look for subs, but I'm not going to help you with looking for substitutes. That's not a strategy that I personally play. You can join our Discord and you can ask Ryan which subs he likes. Yeah, those are my basic thoughts about this showdown. Oh, and one other way that you could potentially get different. I kind of glazed over them, but 2 players who might be like a reasonably affordable way to get a Manchester United goal are Garnacho and Diallo. So in a situation where maybe it's just a late, it's just a counter, maybe there's an intercepted ball, maybe Bruno doesn't assist. I don't mind playing someone like Garnacho or Diallo in the flex. I think they can offer like a 6-point floor and then score a goal. They're actually worthwhile playing if Manchester United do score a goal. Especially, I think Diallo would get subbed. How did he do in his minutes in the most recent game? I only have FA Cup minutes there. Well, you can look at that up on RotoWire, but Diallo is someone who's likely to get subbed for someone like Antony if Antony is on the bench. I don't know, maybe it's Ten Hag's last game, so maybe he gets to do his final FU to Antony and just not play him. But Garnacho seems a little bit underpriced relative to what he can offer as someone who can score a goal in GPPs. And Garnacho and Diallo are also going to be pivots off of a 6K Ortega, who I think is going to be like reasonably popular. I think favorites in 1-0 lineups are going to be popular. So I think like Ortega captains are going to be like 8% in GPPs. You might see him like 35%. So playing someone like a Garnacho or Diallo for a goal, or just playing for any Manchester United goal, really, that does give you, a decent leverage opportunity on the field that's worth considering. So keep in mind those 2, especially given that they're priced around Manchester City players who we want to play. Let's see. Any last thoughts? Casemiro 7,200. That's your terrible take, contrarian play. He might actually be like sub 5%. But yeah, I think this is a tricky one. Doesn't really feel like there's a huge pool of viable lineups, especially if this game mostly goes according to script. We're going to expect someone like Haaland, Foden, or KDB to be the optimal captain a huge bunch of times. So you're going to want to balance your risk taking a little bit with, I want to find some way to play chalky lineups in a slightly unique way. So that's one thing I'm going to be thinking about. And then when you want to be risky, you can say, okay, I'm going to captain Adoku in this spot. Maybe he scores the 2 goals and that's it. Even if he comes off after 70 minutes, that could be enough. That definitely has some merit, especially with where he's priced by. Like I said, I like, the Onana with a bunch of Manchester City players. I don't think many people are going to want to build lineups like that. And I like trying to squeeze in, lineups that would have Ortega in them, playing a Diallo or Garnacho, and then just playing that lineup as is. That seems fairly interesting to me as well. So some tactics for you. We'll see how it goes overall. I think at 25 minutes, that was more than enough on the showdown. Again, rotowire.com/soccer trial. Join us in Discord. We'll be there in the morning, I'm sure, talking about the lineups, making fun of United because they're bad, in my opinion. Sorry to the United fans. And just having a good time. But yeah, on behalf of myself and Adam, I don't know why I'm doing this. And, on behalf of RotoWire Soccer, thank you very much for tuning in and good luck in your contests tomorrow.